Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to let folks file in a little bit into the webinar before we get started. Again, welcome. Thanks for joining us at the Point of the Mountain Transit public meeting. We're letting people kind of file in. We're watching the attendee list grow. Thanks for being here with us tonight. In the meantime, before we get going, we'd encourage all of you to access some supplemental materials to our presentation available on the website, u.input.utah.gov/point transit. There's some things there that you can look at a little bit bigger, blow them up as we go so that you can kind of see that detail. And we'll be dropping some things in the chat as well. If you have any issues during the webinar with technology or anything like that, any access problems, please feel free to give us a call at the hotline that you can see here on the screen, 385-374-9992. We've got our staff on the hotline and ready to help troubleshoot and assist you if you need anything like that. Looks like we've got a good amount of people into the webinar so far. So I'll go ahead and kind of advance things. My name is Katie Corianos. Again, thank you for joining us for the Point of the Mountain Transit Project public open house online tonight. I do public engagement for this project, and we're excited to be able to interact with all of you today, give you some information about where we're at and some study findings and potential next steps, and also hear from you and the questions that you might have. So again, we're here tonight to talk about the Point of the Mountain Transit Project. It's really where UDOT and UTA have set out to work together and identify the best solution for future high-capacity transit at the Point of the Mountain between Lehigh and Draper. Since the last time we went out to the public, we've completed our transit study update. We have now done the environmental review associated with this, and we're here today to kind of review what we found, right? What our locally preferred alternative looks like and some potential next steps for future implementation. So what to expect tonight, we're going to be doing a presentation for the first part of this meeting, probably for about the next 30 minutes. After that 30 minutes is up, we will then start with our Q&A portion of the meeting. So Q&A is really the time that we'd love to hear from you and the things that you might be wondering about the project, about future plans, and we have a great deal of people online here to be able to help us out with that. I'll give you a couple of just kind of housekeeping items with the Q&A. You should see something at the bottom of your Zoom webinar screen that looks very similar to what you're seeing on the slide here. That green kind of circled area is the Q&A button. Please feel free to click on that button and type in questions at any point during our presentation or during the Q&A portion afterward. You'll just open that up, type directly there, hit send, and that will come up into our system and everyone will be able to see those questions. So you can see questions that you put in there. You can see questions that other people put in. If you see something that you really want answered, you have the opportunity to give it a like, give it a thumbs up if you agree with that and would also like that to be heard, and it bumps up to the top of our list. So please, again, feel free to do that at any point as we go, and we will hit all of those questions after our presentation. Couple things on that note, the Q&A functionality that I just went over today is meant to be kind of our two-way communication rather than formal comments on the EA itself, but we are encouraging formal comments to come in on this environmental document. We are still in the middle of our 30-day public comment period, so we're taking public comments on the environmental study through July 10th, and those can be sent to us through a number of ways. You can see all of those on the screen. You can send us formal comments via email to pointtransit@utah.gov. We can have mailed in comments as well. You can see the address here, 1265 East Fort Union Boulevard, Suite 200 in Cottonwood Heights, 84047. You can submit them through our website at u.input.utah.gov/pointtransit. And you can also call in with verbal comments at 385-374-9992. And if you came here tonight hoping to do a verbal comment, that phone number there is the mechanism to be able to do that. So we've gone through some kind of housekeeping items at this point. Hopefully we're all set and ready to go. Again, please feel free to call us on our hotline or send in a question if you've got any as we go. Now that we've kind of settled on that a little bit, I just want to introduce you to the folks that we have from the project team here on the webinar tonight. I mentioned before that UDOT and UTA are working closely together on this important transportation effort. And we've got people from both agencies on the line here ready to give you some information and field questions. So first, our presenters are Jim Golden, our UDOT Transit Division Director. He's going to talk to us about the transit study update, kind of the findings there, some potential implementation approaches for our locally preferred alternative. And then Patty Garver with UTA, the Manager of Environmental Compliance and Sustainability. We'll talk a little bit more about the environmental review, what we found there, and kind of what we can expect to see in that document that we're asking for public comment on. So with that, I am going to go ahead and hand things over to Jim. He'll start us off with a little bit of the project and study overview. And quickly before Jim, you start, I did want to let people know, in addition to Jim and Patty, we have a panel of experts on the line. So we'll kind of introduce them a little bit later when we do our Q&A session. But everybody on the panel has been working on this project for the last couple of years and is really excited to hear some questions and interact with all of you on the line. So Jim, now I'll hand it over to you for that overview.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Katie. Can you hear me okay? I got everything turned back on right?
I can hear you great. You're good.
Okay. As Katie mentioned, my name is Jim Golden, and I'm the Transit Division Director at UDOT. As just a quick introduction, this is a new division at UDOT. We started kind of back in 2023 with a vision to just help shepherd state funding on transit projects. UDOT and UTA, we worked together closely for many years. And with this new arrangement, we're just working more closely together than ever. I've appreciated all the work that's gone in by the combined teams of both sides to get us to this point on this project. We've also collaborated with our partners at the Federal Transit Administration, the FTA, and we're excited to finally be at this stage of the environmental assessment. Each agency is focused on planning ahead for expected growth at the point of the mountain, along with continued growth in both Draper and Lehigh. All of us understand the need to prepare now for high capacity transit service in this area in the future. Anybody that drives north and south on I-15 knows what a bottleneck this is. This EA was done in line with federal NEPA requirements, analyzing the potential impacts of each alternative to the built and the natural environment. As most of you know, the point runs through the former prison site, which is being developed as Utah's innovation community, The Point. While we're interconnected with the folks at The Point and working with them, The Point and our Point of the Mountain Transit Studies are two distinct efforts. You can get more information about The Point development at the website shown here. Also, another separate project that's also in this same area is the Frontrunner 2X. This project will allow Frontrunner trains to provide 15-minute peak service when that is complete. It will add double track to numerous segments all along the corridor from Provo to Ogden. Specific to this project, it will add double track just north of Lehigh and just south of Draper. And in addition, it will add a new station in Bluffdale on the west side of the Point development. I just want to reemphasize that while FR2X will provide some mutual benefits to transit in this area, it's a separate project from the Point of the Mountain Transit Study and the EA that we're discussing tonight. If you need more information on the Frontrunner project, that can be found at the link shown here on this slide. The Point of the Mountain team began with a set of shared purposes to guide the process from the very beginning. We wanted to improve travel between Salt Lake and Utah counties. We wanted to identify ways to connect to the existing regional transit system, look out well into the future, in this case, 2050 and beyond, to address long-term demands. And we wanted to support the future development and the plans and the goals of the area that are happening right now. This project history timeline illustrates the work that's gone into the transit study and the EA over the past several years. And I can't take credit for all of this because I've only been in this position for a couple of years now. So a lot of work has gone into this from the beginning back in August of 2019. The last time we provided an update, December of 2023, We discussed the anticipated mode being LRT, light rail transit. We introduced a potential implementation plan and stated that the environmental review would come next. Now we finalized that environmental review and we released that to the public for review and comment as we're talking tonight. After this review and public comment period, we anticipate a decision document later on this year. I've introduced at a high level the concept of a transit study update and an environmental assessment. While these two studies go hand in hand, I just wanted to take a minute to explain why they're different and yet why we need both of them. The transit study is completed early on and is more of a planning level document. It's used to determine potential alignment stations. It explores different modes. It looks at metrics like ridership, travel times, cost, etc., across all of the different alternatives. And it helps us kind of determine what a preferred alternative might be. Now, an environmental assessment, this is done per the federal requirements, per NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. It's an essential step to advance any project. So it's essential for this project as well. It takes a close look at each alternative's impacts to the built and the natural environment, and then discloses those impacts and outlines any required mitigation. The alternatives developed and analyzed in both the transit study update and the EA are shown here. First, there's always the no-build solution, or this is always something that's analyzed. It just kind of provides a baseline for comparison for the other alternatives. We have BRT, which is bus rapid transit, LRT, light rail transit, which in Utah we know as TRAX. We also looked at DMU or XMU. This is a diesel multiple unit or an alternatively driven multiple unit. Sorry, that's a little hard to say, and sorry for all the acronyms, but these are used somewhat interchangeably between the studies. In the transit study update, it's usually referred to as DMU, and in the EA, it's referred to as XMU. The XMU is kind of a broader, more of an umbrella term. For this mode, it just basically means that it allows to have different power sources to the trains. It could be diesel, it could be hydrogen, or battery powered, for example. Also, we took a close look at operations and maintenance facility locations for these different alternatives, so that these details were also known and documented as part of the overall process. First, we'll jump into a few more of the details surrounding the transit study update, and then we'll look at the EA. Again, this update was completed in the summer of 2023. So the transit study update was conducted in accordance with 2022 House Bill 3, which asked us to look at this a little bit deeper. It built on the alternatives developed and analyzed in the original Point of the Mountain Transit Study, which was completed in 2021. The purpose of the transit study update was to provide a more thorough analysis of the BRT, LRT, and the DMU alternatives. Ultimately, the study team took a closer look at the available rail technologies, refined engineering details and specs, analyzed operations and maintenance needs, and evaluated costs. This additional analysis was done to help identify the best option for delivering high-capacity transit service between Draper and Lehi in 2050 and beyond. And it also considered the plans for development going on in the area. So what did the transit study update find? The graphic on the screen compares key elements of all three of these alternatives, and a link to this document will be available in the chat box. Again, just to reemphasize, this is a planning level document, so our metrics include early estimates for things like capital costs, operations and maintenance costs, projected ridership, anticipated travel times, potential for economic growth, regional connectivity, and a high-level look at environmental impacts to property, noise levels, and vibration. It's important to note that all these estimates for costs listed in the first column, both capital to build the project and the O&M to actually run the system, are in 2023 dollars, which is current with when the study was done in 2023. We'll talk more about costs later, but I'll mention here that currently there's about $75 million earmarked for this future effort. As you can see here, LRT, again, that's TRAX here in Utah, has the highest ridership projections, has the highest potential to support economic development and growth. Cost and travel time for the LRT land about in the middle of the pack, with a good amount of regional connectivity and low to moderate property and noise impacts. The transit study update showed us that the long-term benefits of LRT supported the project's goals and the purposes that I mentioned before, basically to improve travel between Salt Lake and Utah counties, to find ways to connect to the regional transit system, look into the future and beyond for long-term demands, and support the ongoing future development and plans for this area. Now I'll turn it quick over to Patty Garver from UTA, and she'll give us a little more detailed explanation about the environmental assessment.
Thanks, Jim. And as Katie mentioned, hi everyone, thanks for being here. I'm Patty Garver, Manager of Environmental Compliance and Sustainability at UTA. And so moving on from the transit study, we moved into environmental, and as Jim said, we did an environmental assessment, or an EA, and we looked at all three alternatives, all three modes, BRT, LRT, and XMU. And on this slide, it's showing the environmental resource categories that had the most differences between the three modes. And I should note that BRT had the least amount of impacts for these particular resources. LRT had the second least, and then XMU had the most. So for these resources of acquisitions, noise, vibration, and water, BRT only had impacts for acquisitions. LRT had impacts for acquisitions, noise, and water, so wetlands, and XMU had impacts in all four categories as shown on this slide. And likely because BRT is more flexible, it can make tighter turns, it can go up a steeper incline. LRT is a little bit more flexible than XMU, but less flexible than BRT. So that kind of explains the differences that you're seeing here. Next slide. So this slide is showing that for most other categories, most other environmental resources, we had little to no impact for any of the modes. They were all very similar for these categories. I would like to note for historic and cultural, there is an adverse effect on the Union Pacific and Utah Southern Rail Corridor, but we would mitigate it with, we have an MOA with the State Historic Preservation Office that would mitigate that impact for the preferred alternative. I also wanted to mention that the corridor is 10 miles long, and about half of it is fully developed, and the other half is within UTA's right-of-way, and which includes that historic rail corridor. So that shows the summary of the EA. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Jim to talk about the LPA and next steps for the project. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Appreciate Patty and all of her efforts with UTA. She's been involved with this a lot longer than I have, and I know we're all excited to be at this point. We've walked through what the transit study update and the EA analysis taught us about each alternative, and now we'll focus on what's been identified as the locally preferred alternative, or the LPA. Once again, I'm sorry for all the acronyms, and these are really close together. LPA, LRT, it gets a little confusing, I know. So I'll try to be right on these, and hope you can follow me. So the locally preferred alternative, or the LPA, is a term used for the purposes of the environmental assessment. It's basically the recommended solution that we discovered for the project. In this case, the LPA is light rail transit, also known as LRT or TRAX here in Utah. That's what we're most familiar with. Light rail has been identified as the LPA based on these key criteria. It had the highest potential for economic growth. It had the highest forecasted ridership, the potential for regional light rail connectivity into the existing network, and also offers fastest transit travel times for trips served by the LRT within the project corridor. With the transit study update and the environmental analysis having been performed, LRT becomes the locally preferred alternative. Now, earlier we spoke about a separate project to add double track to Front Runner and to add a Front Runner station in Bluffdale. That new station and the possible connection are shown on this map here in yellow. At some point in the future, Point of the Mountain Transit could be evaluated to terminate at the Front Runner station and Bluffdale Front Runner station rather than the Draper Front Runner station. We'll complete the EA as it is right now, showing Draper, but then we could reevaluate that in the future if that were where we wanted to go. Now, I mentioned before we took a close look at estimated costs for these alternatives. LRT, while performing in each of those areas we just reviewed, it's high performing in those areas, but it does require a significant investment. Currently, we have the $75 million in state funds available to put toward this solution, but as you can see, there's a significant gap. The new funding sources would need to be identified and accessed to get the full LRT implementation. And this kind of summarizes that cost a little bit. Here's just as a quick refresher, here's the rundown of the costs we expect to be associated with the full LRT implementation. The capital cost, or the cost to build the system, is upwards of $945 million. Of course, that was in 2023 dollars. Then there's the cost to run and maintain the system at more than $6 million per year. Finally, we have to plan for more than $400 million to prolong the life of the infrastructure and the vehicles through the rehabilitations and replacements that will take place over the next 50 years. This is estimated over a 50-year cost. So again, it's $75 million available now. We currently do not have enough funds to fully implement the project. That said, we know that we can't neglect this area as it continues to grow and develop. So we've outlined a phased implementation plan to help us to meet eventually to get to our ultimate end goal. For the locally preferred alternative implementation, we've decided on a phased approach for a few reasons. It will help us be flexible with funding needs and opportunities as they become available. It will service transit-oriented development as it comes, and as it is, and it will help us be sure we're matching our efforts with the needs of the time. As the area grows and evolves, our transit solutions can be implemented to match the current needs and then adjusted as future needs arise. Phase 1 would start with dedicated shuttles at the Point of the Mountain area, along with other innovative mobility zone solutions. These we call them IMZs. These would be similar to, for example, UTA's on-demand service that they have currently that's powered by VIA. It's also similar to Uber and Lyft that most of us are familiar with. This phase would start with the initial occupancy of the point. And it could be provided by UTA directly or possibly even by a private vendor, depending on the needs. UTA is constantly monitoring their service utilization, and they increase bus service frequency as demands are met, or as demands are there, and as the standards for those services are met. So you could see some changes in UTA services through this area as the development continues. Then ultimately, phase 2 would be the full LRT build out or TRAX implementation between Lehigh and Draper. And as we consider this option, it's exciting to think about the possibilities this investment will bring to this area, to this critical area of our state. Finally, I'd like to just take a moment and thank our partners that we've worked closely with throughout this whole process. As you can see, with a complex project like this, it takes input from a lot of different fronts. And we've appreciated the efforts of everyone involved, the cities, the developers, the planners, and all other stakeholders. A lot of those are shown here on this slide. Just thanks again to all those that have been involved. With that, I'll ask Katie maybe to take over and guide us through the Q&A session. Just be sure that we're done before the NBA draft starts at 6, because the Jazz have the number 5 pick. So I need to be ready for that. So Katie, back to you.
Oh gosh, thanks so much, Jim and Patty, for all that great information, and everybody online for sending in your questions. Just wanted to quickly do a couple of reminders about who we have on the line here tonight. We've got Jim and Patty, of course, here and available to field questions. Marcus Bennett with UTA, he's been our project manager and is very well versed in all aspects of the project. Claire Woodman on our project team planning lead, Morgan Stump with the project team in design and project management, and Erin Ferguson on the project team. She is our environmental lead. So hopefully we've got anybody and everybody here that you might want to talk to and ask some of these questions. We're at about halfway through the meeting with just over 30 minutes left. We want to get to as many questions as we can throughout this process. It looks like we've got about 6 to start with, which is great. If we continue talking and more things pop up, please, as you're listening, feel free to send us more as we go. And if not, we might share a little bit more information that we've prepared for you guys as helpful stuff. So we're going to kind of go ahead and get going with our first question. Looks like we've got that question from David Ferris. We've got 7 people who liked this question, so it rose to the top. Thank you, David, for sending this in. Marcus, 8 people. Look, we're watching it rise in real time. Marcus Bennett, we're going to pitch this question to you. David is asking about connecting to the Blue Tracks line in Draper Town Center. Any chance of continuing the blue line to connect with this new LRT near 146 South, or extending this new LRT down 123rd South to connect to the blue line?
We ask ourselves this question also. So in the very beginning of the study, that was one of the alternatives evaluated, and public feedback was collected on that, as well as the metrics developed for that alignment as well as others. Ultimately, it was not selected as part of the LPA alignment, the locally preferred alignment. So specifically, that is extending the blue line in the historic rail corridor from Draper Town Center to 146 South. That could proceed forward separately and independently from this, and it is not part of this project.
Great, thank you, Marcus. Appreciate that. Oh, Stacy, you're on mute.
I'm on mute, of course. Had to have somebody do it. I'm Stacy Arthur. I'm also on the public engagement team for this project. I'm going to be helping facilitate the Q&A with Katie. So our next question we wanted to toss to Jim, if that's okay. Marcus, feel free to chime in as well if needed. But the question is, does the change from BRT to LRT delay transit line from being installed?
That's a good question. When you look at BRT and the flexibility of building a BRT, it obviously is probably a little bit easier, not as much infrastructure involved. It could probably happen a lot quicker. LRT, as we analyze this, it's kind of more of an investment. It provides us the best alternative in the long term. And so while there could be a slight delay to overall implementation, the team felt like the overall benefits of having LRT in the future would outweigh the slight delay that it might take to get that implemented. Does that help, Marcus? How did I do?
Yeah, no, great. It is hard for us to talk about delays for projects that aren't funded yet, right? And
True.
So with the BRT not having been funded and the LRT not having been funded, they don't have defined timeframes. But as Jim said, LRT is much more challenging and expensive to implement, so generally takes longer. And right now, just if you're wanting our forecasts on that, it is in the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, in phase 2. And so that would be in the 10 to 20 year horizon. But of course, until a funding plan could be developed, that schedule would be unknown.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Jim and Marcus. Our next question coming in is a question about where we talked about property impacts. Let's see. I'm sorry, I just lost the top one. There we go. Patty, I was hopeful that you could kind of start this off from an environmental review standpoint. The question is, what do you see as low to moderate property impacts? As someone who lives in the nearby development, I want to know what will be done to keep kids and families safe.
Well, as far as the property impacts go, the majority of them are partial strip acquisitions, and most of them are commercial or government or vacant parcels. And as far as safety goes, I mean, our system, our projects, safety is like our #1 priority. I can pass it over to Marcus, I guess, if he wants to give more detail on safety features, or Morgan for the project.
Yeah, just with what Patty's saying, when it's talking about property impacts, it's talking about a property that would be acquired. And so, you know, safety is something we are worried about and focused on in many different directions. And I would be projecting to pick a particular direction. You know, pedestrian access is a major focus, and we would want to make sure that any location where the rail is interfacing with sidewalks, that there are appropriate controls to create visibility for the rail line and to help people be aware of the train coming through. So that would, of course, be included in the project. If there's a specific safety concern, we'd be happy to talk more specifically about that.
Great. Thanks, Marcus. I think we'll keep going to you again. The next question from Zach Decker is, which alternative is best for wheelchair users?
All of these options would have ADA access. We're very fortunate in Utah that our transit network, the built infrastructure, is built to support wheelchair users, and that's part of the generation in which we've built our infrastructure. So even our local bus routes have ADA ramps that extend. So, and you know, the on-demand zone that's existing there in the innovative mobility zones, typically those have full wheelchair access as well. So we're really fortunate that isn't a differentiator between the options.
Well, thank you for that one, Marcus. We've got a question coming in from Daniel. Daniel asked, and Morgan, I'm hopeful that you can maybe help out with this one. Daniel asked, will the initial shuttle option have its own separated way of travel, or will it be sharing the road and traffic with everyone else? So we're talking about the initial kind of interim solution, it looks like.
Yeah, for that initial shuttle, for the most part, that would be operating mostly on roads that already exist, right? So what they're looking at doing is those shuttles would really utilize the existing infrastructure, build up that ridership, and then when the time's right, transition that to light rail and pick up those riders there. So for the most part, those would all be in existing right of way or on those new roads, like within the point. Marcus, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, that's the intent. UDOT's intent behind those options is that they're flexible, nimble, can be deployed quickly. And so they don't have a footprint associated with them for the most part. There could be bus stops, concrete pads.
Thank you so much. We'll go on to our next question for Jim. What kind of funding help might we get from the planned Olympic venture?
Oh, wow. Yeah, the Olympics, just what, 9 short years away now, I think is what we're thinking. You know, there's a possibility that as Utah seeks funding from the federal government or from the state leaders or whoever that might be, that there might be some discussion about, hey, we have the Olympics coming, could we get some help with this? For the most part, what we're looking at on all of our transportation projects are building for the state of Utah, building for our own growth, for what we're going to need. We're not going to build just for the Olympics. Now, we might be able to get some money accelerated a little bit so that we're done ahead of the Olympics, and that would be awesome. I would love that, you know, clap, clap. That would be great. But I don't know that we're necessarily going to get anything special because of the Olympics, but it could help us as part of our argument for, hey, we've got something ready to go. We'd like to get it done before the Olympics. Could we get some extra money from the federal government or something like that to help us in that way?
Well, thanks, Jim. Next question that we've got here at the top of our list. Let's see. Question about the location in proximity to the hospital in Lehigh. With the hospital, Marcus, with the hospital in the Lehigh location, how does LRT affect helicopter access?
We would expect no impacts to helicopter access. Just the power lines for the LRT do not extend high enough such that that would be an issue.
Cool. Thank you.
I think we're going to keep going with you, Marcus, if that's all right, but anyone feel free to hop in. Next question from Maxwell is, how difficult would it be to extend the LRT connection at the southern end all the way to the Lehigh Frontrunner station?
Very difficult. We thoroughly evaluated that when in 2023. When we did that advanced rail options, we looked at a rail option that would go from the historic rail corridor to the Lehigh Frontrunner station. And ultimately, it was decided that the LRT option should include a bus connection for that connection to Frontrunner because it would be so expensive to make that connection. I think it was nearly a mile-long bridge that was necessary to make that connection happen. And so we didn't see that as a cost-effective element to include in that alternative. Speaking more generally about extensions, of course, this project would be fully compatible with extensions of any mode within the historic rail corridor, both north and south. That's a very easy check on the south end. On the north end, because we have a major structure at that location, we did spend some more time looking into that, and it is fully compatible with extensions to the north within the historic rail corridor.
Perfect. Another question here for Morgan. Morgan Grant is asking, did the location of the maintenance facility change? Or is it still also cleared for the large UTA parcel on the west side of the Frontrunner line south of 146 South?
Yeah, so for light rail, what was cleared in the EA for the maintenance facility was actually a UTA-owned parcel on the east side of the UTA-owned corridor up near sort of the Highline area. And so that parcel provides direct access for the trains to get on and off there. And so that's one of the challenges with light rail, is just making sure that that connection can happen. The one I think that's being referenced is actually, I think it was cleared for BRT. So it was included in the EA for as part of the BRT O&M facility, but for light rail, we picked one that was more on corridor so that we could access it directly.
All right, thank you, Morgan. We have another question. This sounds like the same thing we've been hearing for over a decade. Transit will come hopefully in the unforeseeable future. The question is, what is preventing this from actually being planned with dates attached? And Jim, do you want to start us off with this one?
Oh, yeah, this is my favorite question. It's hard to say, you know, just funding, just money. You know, there's so many variables that go into this. We want to build smart. We want to build ahead if we can, you know, of the development that comes. And so we have to do these types of studies well in advance of those needs so that we can be ready. As we talked about the implementation plan, we said this allows us a little bit of flexibility so that when funding opportunities become available, we can jump on those and hopefully meet those requirements, get that funding. I'm not the federal expert like some of the other folks are that have been doing this for a long time, but I know that the requirements for federal grant money change over time. And so there, we may see a change from the federal government that says, hey, now this is the requirement. And we may say, hey, we're ready for that. We can jump on that money now. And that's what we're hoping to do. The other thing would be just through our own state, through our own investment. If we have our legislature say, hey, we see this development, we see it as a priority, and we're going to put state money toward that. So tax money, whatever that might be, toward that development, that can help us move these along faster. But right now, and like what we're doing today, we're basically setting the stage so that we can take advantage of that funding when it comes available.
Thanks, Jim. Next question up, let's see, Claire. The question in from Jordan is, in the future, could this extend farther south in Utah County?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think Marcus may have answered that within another question earlier, but this project could be compatible with a future extension to the south as well.
Great. Next question is implementation dependent upon appropriations made in the next legislative session? And I think Jim kind of started on this, but maybe Marcus, do you have anything else to add here?
Yeah, that is one way that this could be accelerated, right? For the transportation funding sources that we're all able to influence the programming of directly, they aren't sufficient to advance this project substantially. And so our focus is to advance the project such that it can be funded if those opportunities arise. And that can come from many different directions. When Jim's referring to the federal, right now, when we evaluate pursuing federal funds and we look at our ridership and cost metrics, it doesn't pencil out. We are confident we would not be competitive in those programs, the major programs. There's smaller programs, but the major programs we would not be competitive in at this time with the current metrics. But as Jim noted, sometimes those metrics do evolve. Next spring is when we could see updates to those requirements that could make some changes. But the other thing that changes over time is utilization of transit increases, and that helps our performance in those metrics. And development comes in that supports the transit. And when we say transit coming in, there's steps that we take growing into transit. In our case, it often starts with an on-demand zone where we have small vehicles going to pick up individuals. And then eventually we grow into a fixed route bus where we have a bus coming every hour. And we take those one step at a time. And as utilization increases, we perform better in those metrics. And ultimately can justify the investment levels.
Awesome. Morgan, a question coming your way. Did your LRT evaluation take into account design grade maximums for that rail system?
Yes, that is a great question. It's probably one of the bigger challenges on the project, just how to climb the hill from the sort of Pamsla Point development area up to the rail corridor. So that's something we did a pretty extensive evaluation because it's quite different between a bus, a light rail vehicle, and a DMU. So we did some extensive research to make sure that we were capturing what would be reflective sort of nationally across the country. What are they doing? What sort of is working for light rail systems? So we reached out to partner agencies to make sure that sort of we were presenting something that would be reasonable. And we also did a sort of rail simulation that looked at specifically light rail and making sure that those trains could climb up that grade. So yes, it does. It is steep, but we do think it'll work. And that's part of one of the things we evaluated between those three options.
Thanks, Morgan. Moving on, we had a question from David. The cost for projected ridership seems really high. Where does this project rank overall transit priorities in the Salt Lake and Utah counties? Is this the greatest need? And then we had a subsequent question they wanted to kind of tie together is, would the LRT alternative run entirely in its own right of way, or will it share some street sections like downtown Salt Lake? Let's start with that first section. Where does this project rank overall in transit priorities? Is this the greatest need? Marcus and Patty, maybe you two can tag team this one.
Sure, we could start. There's a lot here.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about prioritization, that gets reflected in many ways. One of those ways is that regional transportation plan, where the regional planning agencies are all in agreement right now that this belongs in phase 2 of the regional transportation plan. So that means the 10 to 20 year horizon. So anything that you would see in the regional transportation plan in phase 1, or you would see in UTA's 5-year capital plan, our 5-year service plan, there is extensive content in all of those. All of that would be ranked higher at this time. And a lot of times when we're talking about transportation need, a true need, with transit, it looks like a bus and a bus driver going to pick up an individual or a group of individuals. And that's what the 5-year service plan presents, incremental steps of providing additional bus service as demand increases and, as Jim mentioned, as utilization and our service standards are met. Patty, where did I miss on that one?
I think you hit everything on that one.
And I actually misread. David had asked to combine his question with Isaac's question, which is, we'll come back to Maxwell's question about right of way. But Isaac had another question. It's a little bit longer, but he says the projected ridership for the Point of the Mountain transit seems low, with the ridership projections similar to the S line at 1,200 and 1,600 riders per day. When the least used TraxLine has 12,000 riders per day, that's not much ridership for a $945 million project. What's the justification for a corridor that is projected to get at best a third of the ridership that any of the TraxLines currently have? And for that matter, would have less ridership than both the existing BRTs and 13 of UTA's bus routes. That's a bit of a lengthy one, but maybe we can kind of tie this into what you were talking about before, Marcus.
Yeah, sure. This is very much the same topic here. So we have many transit projects that we're advancing, and Jim talked about how the funding opportunities for those different projects evolve over time. And this project's strengths are not ridership and cost, as that commenter identified. It does have strengths in supporting economic development and long-term planning. And so as funding sources become available that prioritize those strengths, then this project is more likely to advance further and be prioritized. And so, yes, the limited utilization does limit our ability to dedicate funding sources that are really focused on moving large numbers of people. Even if we did try to pull we don't have those funds to program, so we wouldn't be able to advance it quickly if we wanted. Claire?
I'll also just add that that is really the impetus for the development of a phased implementation plan, is recognizing that there is a substantial upfront capital cost with lower ridership. So what can we do in the short term as we're building that additional demand for ridership that we know will be there in the future?
Well, thanks everybody, and thank you for those questions. Maxwell, back to Maxwell's question. This is one, Patty, you kind of mentioned earlier about UTA right-of-way and things like that. Maxwell asked, would the LRT alternative run entirely in its own right-of-way, or will it share some street sections like in downtown Salt Lake?
Well, for the majority of the corridor, it would be in its own right-of-way. There are some locations up by Draper Frontrunner and at the Point where it would be more of a mixed operation, but it's still in its own lane, in its own corridor. I don't know, Marcus, if you want to add more to that.
Yep, that's exactly right. in downtown Salt Lake, we have some areas where we have private vehicles driving in the same place as our trains. That is not included in this project. All of it is exclusive use. However, in some locations, it is within the roadway setting, similar to downtown Salt Lake, right next to travel lanes.
Right, we'll move on to our next question. For Marcus again, why is the less ridership between BRT versus LRT if the stops and frequency is the same? I think they meant why is ridership less between BRT and LRT if the stops and frequency are the same?
Yeah, we ask ourselves these same questions. So our travel demand models are calibrated to the existing use of our riders, of our transit network. And what we find is that rail modes become more attractive to more users. And so when we are using our travel demand models calibrated to existing users, they tend to predict, even on the exact same alignment, on the same frequency, same stops, they tend to predict a higher utilization of the rail mode. And I will note that because we don't have that connection in Lehigh for LRT, the LRT option does have a transfer built into travel times. And what our travel demand models measure and predict is saying, hey, even though there is that extra transfer, we are predicting higher utilization. So yeah, great question.
Thanks, Marcus. I'm going to do a quick just kind of time check-in with everybody. We've got just under 10 minutes left in our hour and 10 open questions. So we want to answer everything that we're getting. We just ask if you have additional questions coming in, please get them in before 6 o'clock. We'll answer everything that we get before 6 and stay here with you until that's done. But anything after that, we'd like to kind of follow up with everybody on a one-on-one basis if we need to. So thank you for all the great stuff. This is good to see. Jim, I'm hoping you can start this one off and you can have others jump in if you'd like, but we have a question that says, what is the timeline for the development at the point, retail, housing, employers, and has the corridor for LRT been preserved?
And Marcus can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I know that the timeline is, I mean, that's up to the point development. I think right now they're telling us 2027 is when they expect occupancy on some of their first vertical structures. And we have worked with them to preserve the corridor for light rail. So it's kind of set aside, and maybe even Morgan could answer this one, but we've given them the dimensions that we would need to have light rail through the point development. And they're doing their plan based on what we've given them. Morgan or Marcus, anything more to that, or?
Morgan's done a lot of work to help ensure that roadway network is compatible with LRT.
Yes.
It's a lot of review, and it's a moving target. So, but a lot of us are invested in having it be compatible.
Then I'm going to skip down to a question that has 8 upvotes here. They said, I know there's not a way to give an exact estimate, but are we talking about 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years before the locally preferred LRT system could be constructed? Marcus, you want to grab that one too?
Yeah, as mentioned, that's our best forecast, given the lack of funding and the agreement that this should be in phase 2 of the RTP. But just as a reminder, it is available for to be funded sooner if those allocating funding deem prudent.
Perfect. Let's see. I'm glad, Stacy, that you mentioned the upvote. We have a couple more down the line with 4 or so that I'm going to kind of skip around to a little bit. This first one, I'm wondering, maybe Patty, from a UTA standpoint, you could start. Marcus, I think it would be good for you as well. The question from Neil that's got 4 likes is, where does this project rank in all the other UTA projects, such as Orange Line, Red Line realignment? And in other words, how many major UTA projects are ahead of this one?
Well, that's a good question. Currently, we do have top 5 priority projects between UTA and UDOT, 5 transit priority projects, and those do not include the point. So this project is behind those. Marcus, if you want to add more to that.
You know, I also work on our 10-year capital plan, where we identify projects that are a priority. And that's one place you could go and look at other LRT projects and other transit projects that are identified for sooner time horizons. This project is in the 10-year capital plan, but only for these environmental efforts to get to this level of screening and level of completion. While other projects, we are aspirational in achieving funding for the one mentioned in the comment, Orange Line. We do hope that that comes in a more aggressive time frame. If you want to learn more about some of those other projects, yeah, you can look at the 10-year capital plan. That's one source.
Thanks, Marcus. And just another reminder, we're about 4 minutes to 6. We'll do our best to answer any questions that come in before 6. But reminder that we have a lot of information on our website, which we put in the chat earlier. And if you have any questions, feel free to call our hotline or email us as well. But we'll keep going now. Our next most upvoted question, and probably for Marcus again, he's our go-to guy today. So the question is, to induce more transit use, would UTA consider developing some of their land and parking lots near tracks and front-runner stations?
Well, I just do have to identify a lot of what I'm explaining I've learned from the individuals on this panel and those supporting them as well. So as far as parking capacity for specific to this project, two areas have been identified for parking capacity that have been dedicated to transit. So that is included in this project. And, you know, we are changing strategies a little bit over time. We've seen much higher utilization from adjacent development and adjacent land uses than we have from parking. And so in addition to continuing to provide parking capacity, we are also wanting to encourage dense development next to our transit stations. And the state has done a lot to incentivize planning around that. And so you'll see other planning efforts focusing on getting that development adjacent to our stations.
Perfect. Looks like, Jim, we're hoping you can help us out starting this one. Let me see, make sure I can find where we're at. Brad asked, why couldn't the phasing plan include BRT as the first phase of the project and then be transitioned to LRT?
You know, that's a great question, because we kind of ask ourselves the same thing. Right now, I'd point to you know, the overall investment that it would take to put LRT in. Right now, I think we're looking at that and saying, let's jump ahead and make that investment now, so that we can have that value in the future, rather than spending some money on something else in hopes to get there at some point. But this is always an important question, one that we bounce back and forth a lot, because BRT is very flexible. We've seen the success of some of our other BRT projects. But as Marcus mentioned earlier, the ridership models that UTA uses show that people are usually more attracted to rail. And so for the overall look at this project, we felt like the rail option would be the one to move forward and then anticipate. So the phased implementation would be, as Marcus said, we'd start with some on-demand, and then maybe that turns into a bus route that runs through this area. And then maybe that eventually turns into more of a core route that's more frequent. And eventually it leads to light rail. And we've got the corridor preserved to do that in the future. So could we use that corridor for BRT? If you know, projections change and we feel like that might be a better option, that could still be an option we could consider. But we just feel like the investment in LRT is worth it at this point.
Thanks, Jim. Next question for Patty. Let me find where that went. If UTA owns the former Union Pacific LASL right-of-way, why is starting at the point of the mountain when it would seem that there's more population that could use the light rail in places like American Fork and Orem? So why are we starting at point of the mountain?
Well, I mean, the purpose of the project one of the purposes was to provide a regional connection between southern Salt Lake County and northern Utah County, but also supporting the development at the point was one of the purposes of the project. So I guess I wouldn't say that we're necessarily starting at how did they put it? Starting.
It was oh no, I lost it.
I think I clicked it. Sorry about that.
Starting at the point. I mean,
Oh yeah, starting at the
we're
point.
starting at both ends, so we're connecting. And it was those are the purpose and the need leads the project. That's how we come to the alternatives that we do and the preferred.
Great. Thank you, Patty. Just kind of catching up here. It's 6:01. Thanks everybody for getting your questions in. We've got 6 more that we'll run through. Wanted to ask this, Marcus, we'll go to you first. The question is, was there a to Lehi destination cost comparison between this proposal and the original planned route along the Southern Rail Corridor for LRT? What about a time to service comparison?
Yes, that was all fully evaluated through the course of this analysis. I believe they're talking about like blue line extension, versus the coming from Draper Front Runner Station through the prison site up onto the bench. And when we present ridership projections, those are all taking into account those travel times. And we, of course, have cost estimates for them as well. A lot of this was evaluated back in 2020. However, in recent years, we have refreshed some of that analysis. If you look at, I believe, Appendix K of the Transit Study Update, you'll see some of the ridership metrics for that comparative option. And unfortunately, it is limited additional ridership that would be added. And while that section of rail is not as expensive as others, proportional to the number of riders that are added, it isn't earth-shattering to the metrics on the project. It doesn't dramatically improve anything. It's incremental improvements when we look at that.
And maybe we'll kind of flow into another question from Michael to Marcus. They said, what is the expected ridership and operating cost of the phase 1 service? On average, dial-a-ride service having a high operating cost per rider compared to fixed routes.
Yeah, they're correct that that type of service does have higher per rider operating costs. And the point of it is to be able to grow into more cost-effective transit services. And we've already seen that in southern Salt Lake County. The on-demand zone has already supported the implementation of Route 126, right? And that same advancement is hoped in this area. And so those costs of what UDOT was expecting for additional costs for the IMZ type improvements are shared on that one pager that I believe we in the purple content, sorry, the blue content, it's in the range of $2 to $3 million per year. For the improvements UDOT was considering. However, UDOT is wanting to get more specific about what those improvements could look like as in the next few months, because they are wanting that to be implemented at the same time that building occupancy would occur within the point. So yeah, I don't think we got it into the slides, Katie, but I do think we have it on that one pager, the
perfect.
one. So
Gotcha. We'll make sure
But
that's also
about-
linked on the homepage.
yeah, it's about 3 million between the two zones that they were thinking.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay, let's see, just getting kind of organized here. I think, okay, we've got actually another kind of ridership question. Marcus, I think you were talking a lot about ridership. I might just ask you to roll into this one. It says in the earlier slides, it showed BRT is about half the cost of LRT and there were only about 1,000 fewer riders. Wouldn't it be more cost effective to build BRT first? Less cost could happen sooner with the planning done where the system could transition to LRT as the ridership and land use intensities around the facility increase as development increases.
Yeah, one item to note about BRT first, then LRT is, and I'm glad we have these costs up on the screen. It's not like you pay 470 million for the BRT and then you just need to do the additional incremental cost of another 500 million to implement LRT. It's both of those costs if you want to do one and then the other. And that's not 100% of both of those costs, but it is substantially both of those costs. And so that is a challenge with that strategy, and why we haven't, that's part of the reason why we aren't presenting that as part of the phasing, because of the duplicative costs that tend to occur with that approach. However, we can continue to invest in bus speed and reliability improvements as we are investing in these on-demand zones. I think there's elements of this I haven't answered. So yes, cost effectiveness per rider, we don't disagree with you on your analysis. And we wish that we could set up these analyses such that we can use math to decide which option to select. But ultimately, the selection of these options is an investment choice. And looking out into the future, the decision has been made that LRT is the right investment choice to work toward in this area.
Thanks, Marcus. Moving to our last three questions here. We'll start with Connor's question. Maybe Jim, you can start us, or anybody feel free to chime in on the panelist team. What is the priority in regards to transit-oriented development, or TOD, as opposed to park and ride options around the proposed LRT stations?
So there's a balance you have to try to find there. Transit-oriented development is awesome, and the closer we can get to a station, the more likely people will be to use that station. There's also those people that live just far enough away that they might need to drive their car. They still want to use transit, but they might need to have their car and have a place to park so that they can then utilize the transit at that point. So you've got to provide space for them as well. And so and Marcus and UTA, and I've learned this in the time I've been in this position, these guys know their modeling and they know their stuff. And so I trust a lot of the models that they do, but we look to say, okay, let's build a parking lot that's this size because it could accommodate maybe, I don't know how many square miles of people that might try to drive and park there and then use transit. But let's have some high density housing close to this area so that people can, if they want to, can simply walk over and use the transit at that point. The transit division is in the trails and transit group at UDOT. And with the trails, we're looking at a lot of first last mile options to get trails or other access, active transportation for people to use to easily get to transit locations. And the more easily people can hop on their bike or just walk on a trail and get to a transit stop, the more likely they are to use it. And so we try to strike that balance. And I think UTA actually does a pretty good job. They do a good job of providing there. I mean, there's some parking rides out there that don't have enough spots. I mean, you can't find a place to park and you're forced to park someplace else. There's others that are, sometimes they're open, plenty of space, and maybe we're trying to find that balance there. We're also hoping for more ridership from either side. I don't know, Marcus, how'd I do on that one?
You did great. So I would just point out that this project is part of the state of Utah establishing the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority and them adopting a strategy of advancing development on state-owned property that would be oriented to transit. Of course, it also has vehicular infrastructure as well. It's an all directions approach, but they have invested greatly in ensuring that development is compatible and oriented toward transit in several directions. And so, you know, we could talk about this one as well as the others for an hour, but that we just need to highlight the investment that the state is making in transit-oriented development relative to this project.
Great, thanks, both of you. Last two questions are kind of future questions, additional connections, things that we're going to shoot over to Claire first. Couple of them we've got, are there any plans to connect the Daybreak line to Lehigh? Need more east-west connections? And the second is, what is the future compatibility with the blue line we mentioned before?
Sure. I'll start with the east-west connections. UTA is currently doing a planning study looking at potential future transit connections east-west in both southern Salt Lake County and northern Utah County. And I'll let Marcus elaborate on that after my blue line attempt here. And as Marcus noted as well, although we're not looking at connecting to the blue line as part of this project, it is intended that this project could be future compatible with an extension of the blue line. And Marcus, feel free to build on either of those.
Well, and I would just credit WFRC is leading that study with UTA and UDOT as partners. The Fresh Look study, they're looking at those east-west connections. And I know that their current results are at a very high level, but that is something that they're interested in and evaluating. I don't believe they have preliminary results on their website though. So you can stay tuned to WFRC leading that effort with all the other partners if there is content they're ready to share that direction.
Perfect. Thank you for that, everybody. And thank you everyone online for the great questions and discussion and for hanging on with us for a couple minutes after we planned. I think it was great information and we're happy that you're all here and engaged with us. If you think of anything else that we didn't get to tonight, please feel free to reach out to our project team. I put our contact information up here on the screen. Also want to reiterate, we are in the middle of an open public comment period through July 10th. We are looking for comments on the environmental assessment. We would love to hear from you through any of these channels. Formal comments can be taken through email, on our website, through a comment form, hotline, and then via mail as well. So with that, we will end things. Thank you again for participating tonight. Hope to hear from you. Bye-bye.